The restaurant was buzzing with laughter, the clinking of glasses and the soft hum of conversations filling the air as we gathered to celebrate Amelia's graduation. The pride in my chest swelled as I watched her, her cap perched proudly on her head, a beacon of our family's sacrifices and dreams. And then, just like that, everything shattered. "I've decided to start a new life without you." The words hung in the air, sharper than any knife, slicing through the joy of the moment. Gregory, my husband of 28 years, stood frozen at the head of the table, his glass of champagne still raised, his face betraying a smug satisfaction. His announcement wasn't a toast. It was a public execution of everything I thought we had built. The room fell into a suffocating silence. Forks and knives froze midair, eyes darted between us, waiting for the storm I was supposed to unleash, but instead, I smiled. "Congratulations on your honesty," I said, my voice steady, as if I hadn't just been gutted in front of everyone I had ever known. The shock in the room thickened as I reached into my handbag, pulling out a cream-colored envelope and placing it on the table beside Gregory's untouched plate. His confident facade faltered. He said, his voice a bit too high-pitched now, "What's this?" "Something for you to read later," I replied, calmly. I turned to Amelia, whose face had drained of color, her wide eyes reflecting the horror of what had just happened. I kissed her cheek gently. "I am so proud of you, sweetheart. This day is still about your accomplishment," I whispered. Then I stood, smoothed my dress, and addressed the stunned guests. "Please enjoy your meal. I wish you all a lovely afternoon." I walked away, feeling the weight of 50 pairs of eyes burning into my back. The heavy restaurant door swung shut behind me, muffling the whispered gossip that followed. As the summer heat of Augusta hit me like a wall, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if I could finally breathe again. Behind me, I heard Gregory's frantic voice. "Bianca, what the hell is this? What have you done?" I didn't look back. My smile deepened. The envelope I had handed him? It was just the beginning of my revenge. I had been planning it for months, and now the moment had arrived.
I never thought it would end like this. I never thought I'd find myself standing outside that restaurant, my heart heavy with something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom. All I ever wanted was to build a life with Gregory. I wanted to be the wife he needed, the mother Amelia deserved. But I wasn't prepared for how deeply I had been deceived, manipulated, and disregarded. I was 54 now. Half my life had been spent behind a veil of devotion, supporting Gregory through every failed business venture, every career change, and every passion project that burned out before it could even catch fire. The world saw him as the charismatic entrepreneur who couldn't fail, but I knew him better than anyone. He was reckless, irresponsible, and most painfully, he was selfish. I had learned long ago that I couldn't rely on him to build our future, so I picked up the slack. I worked extra hours as a finance manager at Truvanta Corp, managing our family finances while he chased one fleeting dream after another. I watched our daughter, Amelia, grow into the brilliant woman she was, and I sacrificed my own career aspirations to ensure she had everything she needed. The prenuptial agreement we had signed 28 years ago was supposed to protect us, or so Gregory had said. I never thought it would be the very thing that would come back to haunt him. I remember the day we signed it like it was yesterday. He had insisted on it. He was still struggling to get his footing, and his business endeavors were starting to take off. I, on the other hand, came from old family money. My father was a successful businessman, and my mother had been a well-known socialite. I was always expected to follow the path of a doting wife, to be a reflection of my mother. I never imagined that one day I'd become a reflection of the very woman my mother warned me not to be, a woman who let herself be erased. Gregory never took the agreement seriously, but I did. I understood its implications, and now it would be my salvation. Growing up, I was taught that loyalty was the most important thing in a marriage. You stand by your partner no matter the cost. But somewhere along the way, I began to realize that loyalty to him had meant abandoning my own dreams. My passion for opening a financial consultancy for women, something I had dreamt of for years, was always put on hold. It was always after Amelia finishes school or once Gregory gets settled. Settled. That was the joke. He never did. I had always been the practical one, but practicality didn't stop the aching resentment that had built up over the years. It wasn't just that I had put my life on hold for him. It was that he had never once asked me to be anything more than the perfect wife, the perfect mother. He never asked for my input in his decisions, and when he did, he dismissed me without hesitation. And then there was the affair. I'd been suspicious for months, ever since the discrepancies started showing up in our joint accounts, small transfers to an account I didn't recognize, expensive dinners, jewelry, and property searches I hadn't been told about. But I didn't confront him, not immediately. Instead, I began to watch, to observe. What I found during my quiet investigation sickened me. He had been moving money into a separate account for over a year. And not just that, he had been planning a life with Cassandra. My own husband of nearly 3 decades was planning to leave me, and he didn't have the decency to do it privately. He was going to humiliate me in front of Amelia, in front of everyone we knew. And that's when I made my decision. I kept my eyes trained on the numbers, tracing every penny, every hidden transfer, but I also made sure to keep up the appearance of the doting wife. When he came home in the evenings, I greeted him with the same smile, the same warmth, never letting him know I was building my case. The breaking point came when I found the text messages. Gregory had left his phone unlocked one night, and I saw the conversation between him and Cassandra. It was worse than I had imagined. They were planning their life together. After Amelia's graduation, he would announce their separation, a public spectacle to minimize the fallout. And that's when the truth became clear. Gregory had never loved me in the way I thought he did. He had never respected me as an equal. The moment I had been planning for months had arrived. But as I walked out of that restaurant, I felt an unexpected sense of calm. I had been betrayed, yes, but I wasn't the one who would have to answer for it. Gregory was.
In the days leading up to Amelia's graduation, my thoughts were consumed with the plan I had carefully set in motion. It was strange, this quiet sense of resolve that filled me, even as I continued to play my role of devoted wife. On the outside, I was calm, but beneath the surface, everything had changed. Amelia, my bright, ambitious daughter, had no idea. She didn't know that the carefully constructed life she had been living was about to shatter. She had been working tirelessly for this moment, her graduation. It was supposed to be the highlight of her young life, a moment where everything we'd sacrificed for her would come to fruition. How could I let that be ruined by Gregory's betrayal? I couldn't. I had to protect her from the ugliness that was unfolding, even if it meant carrying this burden alone for a little longer. That was the hardest part. Pretending. Keeping up the charade while knowing the truth, while knowing what Gregory was about to do to both of us. It wasn't just his betrayal of me. It was his disregard for Amelia's feelings, for her accomplishments. His affair, his plans, his lies were all meticulously timed, calculated to make sure he had the best of both worlds. Cassandra, his younger, more eager version of me, was already in his life. She would be the one he'd run off to once he'd gotten what he wanted from me. I had seen the way they texted each other about our new life, how eagerly she awaited the day when he could finally be free. Free from me. Free from the family he had spent the last 3 decades building. How had I missed this? How had I allowed myself to become so small in his world, to be nothing more than a stepping stone in his quest for self-gratification? The pain of this realization was suffocating at first. It was the kind of pain that made it hard to breathe, hard to think. But then, slowly, it turned into something else. The anger, the betrayal. It began to fester, turning into something sharper, more purposeful. It was no longer just about what Gregory had done to me. It was about what I was going to do in return. I never meant for things to get this far. I had tried over and over to be the wife he wanted, to help him in every way I could. But he had pushed me into this position with his lies, his secrets, his selfishness. It was as if I had no say in anything that mattered. The decision to start my revenge was not something I took lightly. I had spent years building a life that I had thought was secure, stable. But beneath the surface, the cracks were already forming. I could see that now. Gregory was too comfortable in his ability to manipulate, to control. I had been his safety net, his anchor. And when he had no more use for me, he planned to cut me loose. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not without making him understand the full extent of what he had done. Not without showing him that he had underestimated me in ways he couldn't even imagine. I had everything I needed. The evidence of his infidelity, the documentation of his financial deception, the prenuptial agreement that he had thought would protect him, but would now be his downfall. I had thought about it for months, even as I carried on with the daily routines of life. I had prepared for this moment, this reckoning, in ways he could never have anticipated. I didn't go back to the restaurant after I left. Instead, I drove home. The heavy silence in the car, only broken by the soft hum of the engine. I parked in the driveway of our home. The home that I had helped to build. It was beautiful, spacious, and at one point filled with the laughter and joy of a family. But now it felt like a mausoleum of everything I had given up. Everything I had sacrificed for a man who had never truly seen me. I knew what Gregory was going to do. He would try to spin this into a narrative where he was the victim, where I was the one who had overreacted. I knew he would try to minimize my feelings, to make me out to be crazy, irrational, hysterical, and I knew that I couldn't let that happen. He had underestimated me. He had no idea how much I had learned, how much I had quietly observed over the years. He had no idea that I had been preparing for this day. As I walked into our home, everything seemed the same. The family portraits, the grandfather clock that had been passed down from my father, the worn leather couch where we had shared countless nights together. It all seemed so ordinary. But I knew better now. I knew it was all a lie. I went upstairs to our bedroom. The master closet was open, and there it was, Gregory's clothing packed in suitcases, ready to be taken away. He had planned this down to the smallest detail, as though he thought I wouldn't notice. It should have made me angry, but I wasn't angry. I was calm. I was ready. I reached for my phone and began responding to the flood of messages from our friends at the restaurant. They were concerned, but I had no time to ease their worries. Gregory had made his choice, and now I had to make mine. The door slammed open. Gregory's voice was frantic. "Bianca, where are you?" His words echoed in the house as he stormed inside, his face flushed with anger. I was sitting in the living room, calmly reviewing documents on my laptop. "What's going on?" he demanded. I didn't flinch. "What's going on, Gregory, is that you've been planning this for months, and I'm done pretending." It was time to stop being the dutiful wife. It was time to stop being the one who held everything together. This was no longer about Gregory and me. It was about reclaiming my life and my dignity and my future. It all came to a head the morning of Amelia's graduation. I had planned everything to the smallest detail. Each step, each move, each reaction perfectly choreographed to catch Gregory completely off guard. The time for silence, for pretending, was over. As I sat there in that restaurant, watching Gregory make his grand speech, I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was the culmination of everything I had been quietly building. This was the final act of my revenge. Amelia's face was pale as she sat beside me, her hand gripping mine with a mixture of pride and fear. She had no idea what was coming. None of them did. All I had to do was keep my composure. Gregory had no clue what I had prepared for him. His smugness, his false confidence, everything he had counted on was about to crumble. When he stood up, champagne glass in hand, and announced that he was leaving me, the silence that followed was deafening. The murmurs of surprise that rippled through the room barely registered. It was as if the world had paused for a split second, waiting for me to react. But I didn't. I didn't cry, I didn't yell, I didn't even flinch. Instead, I smiled. It was a smile that carried the weight of years of silent suffering, of building up strength in the face of constant betrayal. I smiled because for the first time in years, I felt free. I had the control, not him. "Congratulations on your honesty," I said, my voice steady and calm, though inside my heart was pounding. But there was no time for emotions now. Gregory was about to understand that everything he had planned was about to blow up in his face. I handed him the envelope, the same envelope I had been preparing for months. He looked down at it, momentarily thrown off, but quickly regained his composure. "What's this?" he asked. Clearly trying to play it off as if nothing had changed. He was used to having control over everything, used to thinking he was the one in charge. But not anymore. "Something for you to read later," I replied, calmly, not breaking eye contact. I turned to Amelia, who was staring at me, her face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. I kissed her cheek and said, "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart. This day is about you, and nothing will change that." I stood, adjusted my dress, and looked around at the stunned guests. "Please enjoy your meal. I wish you all a lovely afternoon." With that, I turned and walked out of the restaurant, my steps confident, my head held high. The door swung shut behind me, and I could hear Gregory's voice faintly calling after me, but I didn't turn back. Outside, the air was hot, the oppressive Georgia summer pressing in, but the heat didn't bother me. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of relief, of freedom. Gregory had no idea what was coming for him, no idea that I had already made my move, already set my plan in motion. I had been patient. For years I had been silent, but now the truth would be exposed and Gregory would be the one left with nothing. As I walked, I felt the weight of every choice I had made leading up to this moment. Every late night, every sacrifice, every small concession I had made for the sake of our family. Gregory had always been the dreamer, the one who followed whims, and I had been the one holding everything together. I had given up my dreams, my career aspirations, to support him, to raise our daughter. I had been the one to make sure things worked, while he lived in the fantasy that everything would always fall into place. But now, it was time for him to face the consequences of his actions. I reached the driveway of our home. the house we had bought together all those years ago, the house that he had already promised to Cassandra. It was all so predictable. As I walked through the door, I saw that everything was exactly as I had left it. Family photos on the walls, the familiar scent of wood polish in the air. But it all felt hollow now. Everything had changed. Upstairs, I opened the closet. Gregory's things were packed neatly in suitcases, ready for his departure the next day. The sight of it should have made me angry, but it didn't. It made me feel something else entirely. Satisfaction. He thought he could walk away without consequences. He thought he could have his affair, steal from me, and leave without facing the fallout. But he was wrong. I sat in the living room, calmly responding to the flood of messages from our friends at the restaurant, all of them asking if I was okay. But I had no time to comfort them. I was too focused on the plan that was already in motion. Then I heard the door slam open. Gregory's voice rang out, frantic, confused, his plans falling apart. "Bianca, where are you?" I didn't respond at first. Instead, I calmly closed my laptop, preparing for the confrontation I had known was coming. He stormed into the room, his face red with anger, the envelope still clutched in his hand. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice trembling. "What's going on, Gregory?" I asked, my voice calm and even. "Is that you've been planning this for months, and I'm done pretending." The betrayal, the lies, the deceit, it all came crashing down in that moment, and with it came my decision to take control of my own life, to stop letting Gregory dictate my fate. I had spent too long suffering in silence. I had spent too long letting him manipulate me, letting him use me. But no more. This was my moment. The moment when everything changed. For the first time in years, everything felt clear. The sting of betrayal that had consumed me for so long was suddenly replaced with something else: determination. The moment Gregory had walked into that living room, everything I had been quietly building in my mind, every plan, every piece of evidence, came rushing forward. I was no longer the submissive wife. I wasn't the one who had to apologize or explain myself. No, now I was the one with the power. And Gregory? He was the one who had to face the consequences of his actions. His frantic voice echoed through the house, but I was too focused on my own thoughts to be moved by his pleas. His betrayal had left me numb. But now, as I sat there watching him fumble with the envelope, I knew that the control was mine. He had spent years manipulating me, making me feel inferior, making me feel as though I owed him everything. But the truth was, I had always been the backbone of our marriage. I was the one who made things happen. I was the one who kept the family afloat, while he followed his whims. I looked at him, standing there with his hands shaking, trying to make sense of what was happening. "You don't get to make this easy for me," I said, my voice steady, cutting through his panic. "This isn't about you anymore. This is about what I want, what I deserve." His face drained of color as my words sank in. He had always been in control, always the one who made the decisions. But today, I had taken that power back. He had underestimated me, thought that I was just the dutiful wife, the one who would quietly accept whatever he decided for our family. But he was wrong. Quiet intensity, emotionally off, calm but filled. As Gregory stood there, sputtering his excuses, I knew this was the moment where everything would change. I wasn't the woman who would collapse into tears and beg him to stay. No, I was the woman who had spent years building a life of my own, quietly, behind the scenes. And now, I was going to use everything I had learned to take him down. The truth was, I had been waiting for this moment for years. All the sacrifices I had made, all the compromises I had endured, had been building up to this. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about regaining my own life, about proving to myself that I could rise above his manipulations. It was about showing him that I was no longer the woman who let him control everything. I had played my part in this marriage. Now, it was time for him to play his. I leaned back in my chair and took a deep breath. This was it. The moment of clarity. I could feel it in my bones. Every doubt, every moment of weakness I had felt before now seemed irrelevant. What was important now was that I had the power to shape my own future. And Gregory? He had no idea what was coming next. I had already prepared everything, every document, every email, every phone call, every small discrepancy I had noticed over the past year. Everything I had collected was going to be used against him. He had thought that he could quietly disappear with Cassandra and live a life of luxury. But he hadn't counted on me. As he turned away, still muttering about how this was all wrong, I spoke calmly but firmly. You don't get to make the rules anymore. I'm taking control of my life, and I'm going to make sure you pay for what you've done. He stopped mid-sentence, his back to me now, his shoulders slumped as the weight of my words hit him. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to raise my voice. All I needed was the cold, hard truth, and I was ready to make it count. The silence in the room was deafening. I stood up, feeling the finality of my decision take root. I'm done with you, Gregory, I said softly, my voice unwavering. And I'm done with all the lies. I left him standing there, helpless. The man who had spent years taking from me, who had manipulated me into silence, was now completely powerless. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I had hit rock bottom. I had been manipulated, humiliated, and betrayed. But now I was taking control. And there was no going back. It wasn't just about catching him in the act anymore. It was about making sure that every ounce of pain, every moment of manipulation would be paid back in full. As I walked out of the house, I felt the weight of my decision settle into my chest. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment reaction. This had been years in the making, the culmination of everything I had sacrificed, every inch of myself I had given to Gregory. And now, he would see that it wasn't just me he had wronged. He had wronged himself, too. I drove to the courthouse, the weight of the envelope in my bag heavier than I had anticipated. It wasn't just a divorce decree. No. It was the weapon I had spent months preparing, the one that would break him, that would expose him for who he truly was. He thought he had outsmarted me, that he could waltz out of our marriage with no consequences. He thought I was too weak to fight back. As I stood in front of the judge that morning, I felt a strange calm wash over me. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't afraid. All the fear, all the anxiety that had once plagued me was gone. In its place was a steady determination, a quiet fury that I had held inside for so long. Gregory's lawyer, the young associate he had hastily hired, looked over at me, clearly unsure of what to expect. They hadn't prepared for me. They hadn't prepared for a woman who had spent decades holding her emotions back, who had been quiet and patient for far too long. But now they were facing someone who knew how to play the game, someone who understood the rules better than they could ever imagine. The judge's voice broke through my thoughts. Mr. Caldwell, do you contest the validity of the prenup? Gregory's attorney hesitated before answering. Your Honor, we believe it has expired due to the length of the marriage. I smiled inwardly, knowing the truth. Gregory had already lost. His lawyer was trying to grasp at straws, but the facts were undeniable.
Section 12 specifically states that the fidelity clause remains in effect for the duration of the marriage. You didn't consult an attorney before making assumptions, did you? If you had, you would have known that. Gregory's face turned pale, and I could almost see the blood draining from his body. He hadn't expected me to be prepared like this. He hadn't expected me to be 3 steps ahead. But I had been watching, listening, and waiting for the right moment. And now, that moment had come. I turned to the judge. I have documented evidence of Gregory's financial deception. Transfers to hidden accounts, secret purchases, and his affair with Cassandra Wells. Everything is here. I slid the folder across the table, the pages crisp and clean like the life I was about to take back. Gregory's eyes flickered between me and his lawyer, his anger slowly building, but his panic was more evident. He had no leg to stand on anymore. I strange-eared years of building a life with this man. I've supported him through every failure, every whim. I've put my dreams aside for his, sacrificed my own future for his, and yet he thought he could walk away without facing the consequences. Gregory stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair, his face a mixture of frustration and disbelief. You can't do this to me, Bianca. You're being ridiculous. This is absurd. You've gone too far. I stayed seated, my back straight. I didn't need to raise my voice to make my point. I had already won. Please, take a seat, the judge ordered, her voice firm. We will proceed with the ruling. The judge looked over the documents, her eyes scanning through the prenup and the evidence I had presented. I could see the gears turning in her mind, weighing the truth. There was no escaping it. Gregory had thought he could outsmart me, but in the end, it was I who held all the cards. When the judge spoke, her voice was final. I am ruling to maintain the freeze on all joint accounts pending full financial discovery. Mr. Caldwell's personal account will remain accessible to him, but the family home and assets will remain in Bianca's Caldwell's possession, as stipulated in the prenuptial agreement's fidelity clause. The room was silent, as Gregory's face drained of color, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. He had no control. He had lost everything. The business, the house, the vacation property, all of it was mine. The life he thought he could walk away from was slipping through his fingers. You can't do this to me, Bianca. We built this life together. No, Gregory. You built it on lies, and now you'll have to face the consequences of those lies. I left the courtroom with my head held high. I had done it. I had taken back control of my life, and as I walked out into the bright sunlight, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Freedom.
Quiet intensity. Emotionally off. Calm but filled. The aftermath of a calculated revenge always feels quieter than you expect. The initial burst of adrenaline, the catharsis of action, begins to fade as reality settles in. Gregory's defeat was not just a victory for me. It was the end of a chapter. And as much as I had fought for this moment, I couldn't ignore the ripples it caused. The truth had come to light, and with it, everything had shifted. I hadn't expected him to simply disappear from my life, but the aftermath of our divorce, the business fallout, and the public humiliation had torn apart the image he'd so carefully constructed. People who had once admired Gregory now looked at him with suspicion. Friends who had turned a blind eye to his affair couldn't ignore it anymore. The money he had once flaunted, the reputation he had built, began to wither. I didn't take pleasure in it, but I couldn't pretend I didn't feel some relief. His empire was built on sand, and it was collapsing under the weight of his lies. But the real work came after the dust settled. The house, once a shared space filled with memories of a life I thought I understood, became mine. It was no longer a symbol of our marriage.
It was my sanctuary, the space where I could finally breathe without feeling like I was walking on eggshells, afraid of Gregory's next whim. Every room felt different now, like it had been cleansed of all the guilt, the lies, and the resentment that had built up over the years. I focused on rebuilding. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about moving forward. I opened my own financial consultancy, Caldwell Financial Transitions, helping women who were going through the same kind of turmoil I had endured: divorce, financial betrayal, starting over. I was able to channel my pain into something meaningful, something that could truly help others. The first few months were slow. There were setbacks, of course. There always are when you start something new. But with each client, I felt more confident, more in control. The work was fulfilling in a way I had never expected. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about giving people the knowledge and power to take control of their own futures, just as I had done. Amelia was my biggest supporter. I hadn't told her about the financial manipulation, the affair, the layers of betrayal. She had enough to deal with during her graduation, and I wasn't about to add to her burden. But now that she was fully aware, now that the truth was out, she stood by me like a rock. It was strange, no, beautiful, how quickly the distance that had grown between us during Gregory's manipulation vanished. "You know," she said one evening as we sat together sharing a bottle of wine, "if Dad had just been honest from the beginning, he might have kept half of everything." I smiled, but the smile didn't quite reach my eyes. She was right. If Gregory had simply been truthful, if he hadn't lied, stolen, and schemed, things might have turned out differently. But it was too late now. I didn't know what Gregory was doing in the aftermath. I didn't care. The man I had married, the one I had given my life to, was no longer the person I thought I knew. He was now just a shadow of the man who thought he could play with my life without consequences. His text to Cassandra, his plans for a life he thought I didn't know about, all of it had unraveled, and there was no going back. Diana, my sister-in-law, kept me grounded throughout it all. She wasn't just family, she was a true friend. When I needed someone to talk to, she was always there, offering perspective and a safe space. She too had seen the cracks in Gregory's facade, but she never had the courage to speak up until it was too late. But now, Gregory's downward spiral continued without me. He couldn't afford the lifestyle he once lived. Cassandra was no longer by his side, a casualty of his inability to maintain the illusion he had so carefully constructed. He had nothing left but his pride, and that would be the thing that destroyed him. Months passed, and I continued to grow my business. I reached out to women who needed guidance, women who had been deceived, manipulated, or trapped in relationships like mine. My phone rang constantly. Women who had found themselves alone, just like I had, calling for help, for advice. I was finally in a position to provide that support. The transformation wasn't just financial, it was emotional. I was showing people how to reclaim their lives, how to stand tall and take control, just as I had done. And then, one day, I received an unexpected call. It was Gregory's lawyer. The message was brief, formal, and final. Gregory was filing for bankruptcy. He had run out of options. The debts, the failed business ventures, the stolen funds, all of it had caught up to him. The lifestyle he had desperately clung to was gone. It wasn't a victory. It wasn't justice, not in the traditional sense. But in a way, it was a fitting end. Gregory had always been too proud, too blinded by his own ambitions to see the people he hurt along the way. And now he had nothing left to hold on to but the consequences of his actions. Amelia called me after the lawyer's message, her voice soft but strong. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I'm more than okay," I said, feeling the weight of the years, the weight of the betrayal finally lift from my shoulders. The aftermath wasn't easy. I had to rebuild not just my career, but my sense of self. There were days when I still caught myself wondering if I had done the right thing. The guilt, the responsibility, it lingered in the back of my mind. But then I'd look at the work I was doing, the women I was helping, and I knew that I had made the right choice. Gregory's actions had pushed me to a breaking point, but they had also pushed me to become something I hadn't known I could be, someone who could walk away, stand tall, and rebuild her life from the ground up. Now, the silence didn't feel like a void. It felt like freedom.
As I look back on everything, I realize something crucial. Sometimes we don't realize our own strength until we're forced to confront our darkest moments. Revenge, for me, wasn't about getting back at Gregory. It was about reclaiming what was mine, the life, the choices, and the future I had been denied for so long. And if you're watching this, if you've ever been in a situation where you've felt trapped, manipulated, or betrayed, know this: you have the power to break free. You have the power to reclaim your life. It's never easy, but it is always worth it. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And remember, the greatest revenge is living your truth. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever had to fight back after being wronged, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You're not alone in this.